Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster, and you are watching another Silmarillion Total War replay. I come today bearing gifts to you all. Consider it a late Christmas present. I heard some of you say that you like sieges, and so a siege you shall have. This is going to be a 3 versus 4. On the defense, we are going to have Mithrym, so we're going to be seeing the new faction again, and in addition to, you're going to be seeing the forces of Valinor, the Blessed Realm. They're going to be on the defense today as well, alongside the angry red lobstered sons of Feyenoord. Facing them down is going to be Doriath, Nandan Gorthab. We're going to have Fingolfin and the House of Nargothrond as well. So a little bit of a Noldor royal house brouhaha. But without any further ado, let's take a look here at the defending armies. So, Grey Elves Mithrym being played by Mevin today. He has brought some sword bearers of Mithrym, and they're going to make up the bulk of his force. One of the neat things about the sword bearers that sort of sets them apart from other mid-tier medium swordsmen is that they have really good shield values, and they also have pretty decent charge values as well. Most swordsmen tend to fall into that like 2 or so charge value, whereas these guys have 5, and it does make a difference, especially when you are pairing that with attack upgrades, which it is worth noting will give you +3 to your attacks. So you can really stack the damage with these guys and get some decent value off of the charge. We've also got the Hewing Guildsmen of Androth today. They're going to be Matic armed, so they're going to be a little bit faster than a lot of other medium infantry. They're the only unit in the Mithrym roster that can upgrade their armor from 7 to 9, putting them well into the heavy side of things, and as a result they are no longer able to hide in the woods. But yeah, they've got some nasty armor-piercing damage as well, and they're one of the few high-tier infantry options available to the Grey Elves of Mithrym. Some of the other high-tier units are going to be present on the field today. This is one of the units you have not seen yet, and this is the Bane of the Incomers, and they're kind of interesting. They're definitely unique to Mithrym in that they have something that we've decided to call crystal arrows. They work a little bit like the mangonel. There is a little bit of a learning curve to using them because you need to get the spacing proper in order to get the spread once the projectile detonates into a shard or a hail of crystal shards, which is excellent for dealing with large, bulky blobs of troops, such as in a siege. They're going to be particularly powerful. And they've also got some nasty axes in close quarters as well, so they've got a really good charge value. They are relatively fragile, however, especially for high-end infantry, and they have lower melee defense, as many of the Mithrym units do, especially with those axes, and they don't have the greatest armor either, and there's only 100 of them in the unit. So I believe Mevin has brought at least 2 of them today. We might even have as many as 3, so you're going to see a lot of shrapnel spitting fire flying around the battlefield. We have some more Guildsmen of Androth. It's going to be 3 of those units in total today. We've got the Scions of Tuor as well. They had a little bit of extra nasty armor piercing. They are relentless, quite lightly armored, but they have really good melee defense, huge attack values, armor piercing, as I mentioned, and some really solid shield values as well. A whole bunch of the Sentries of Mithrym here as well. They're just really good at being a line infantry unit. They are just fabulous spears. They pair pretty good melee defense, a little bit lower than average because it is Mithrym we're talking about, but they of course have the large shield value to pair with that fast thrusting animation and some just overall good defensive stats and numbers. They're really good for their cost. We've also got the Bannerets of the Hithershore, rather. They are a medium lancer. This is the legendary company for the Grey Elves of Mithrym, and they are basically knights on loan from the House of Fingolfin, so they benefit from a lot of the melee defense bonuses that the Fingolfin units do for their sword-armed infantry. And that's basically the long and short of them here, although I believe we have a couple units of the Elders of the Twilight Hearth. Obviously, this is a very big budget Mithrym army. If they're able to bring 3 of the Bane of the Incomers, normally I think they can like bring like 2 or maybe even as low as 1. And the Elders of the Twilight Hearth are capped at 2, as they are a 1 HP bodyguard unit. But yeah, they're more of an anti-monster, really nice heavy unit, rather than a skirmish supremacy unit. Even though they do have the heavy armor and the shields, they don't have a ton of ammunition. But that's going to do for Mevin's army. Let's head on over to the center here and take a look at what Valinor is bringing to the table. So R.H. Dawn is going to be one of our testers. He's going to be playing with the Peacekeepers of Valimar, and they have kind of gotten closer to, I think, what is going to be their final iteration in the last couple patches. One of the big new changes that came to them is that they can upgrade their armor, bringing them from 7 to 9. And because of the new system, units that go from medium to heavy armor no longer have the ability to hide in the woods, so they're treated a little bit more similarly to heavy infantry. But of course you get the extra survivability, so it is a kind of a nice little trade-off there. So we've got at least one. I think we've got a second one in here as well. We have some Hearthguard of Sirion, doubtless with a couple of armor upgrades tacked on there. The Hearthguard are just really nice line infantry. They're also the default artillery crew unit, so you can always bring a fairly substantial number of Hearthguard infantry units. There's not really many of them. As you notice, the unit size is obviously very small, and that's because it's to represent the sort of remnant of the Noldor that stayed in Valinor under King Fingolfin. So there's not going to be many of them, but they are very, very solid units, and defensively they're sort of the tanky units of the Valinor roster. Over here we have some of the lower-end Telerin units, Swanguard of Alcolonde on the field. They're just sort of a light spearman, but they do have a lot of things going for them with exceptionally high melee defense for their tier. Over here we have the Sentinels of Sirion. They're going to distinguish themselves a little bit from the Hearthguard in that they don't have the same defensive abilities, and they can't get an extra armor upgrade, but they do have Relentless, which will play in quite nicely to their more offensively focused stat line. So they're just going to absolutely truck through things, and like all of the other Valinor, Vanyar, and Noldor units, they do have 2 HP, so exceptionally tanky. Valinor on the defense and siege can just be an absolute meat-grinding monster. We'll see how they fare in today's match. And behind them we have some Mariners of Alcolonde. These are light harassment javelins, ideal for sparring with other skirmishers or dealing with large blobs of infantry or with lightly armored units in particular. In particular. A second company here of the Sentinels of Sirion. We've got some Plaza Guardians, very nasty. They kind of combine, because the Vanyar are specialized in their spears, they kind of combine a lot of the strengths of two-handed spears and halberds. So they have slashing damage and armor piercing the same way the halberds do, but they don't have the melee defense penalties. In fact, they have the bonuses that two-handed spears would get. So they're very, very fearsome. Obviously, they don't have a lot of armor. They can only have 7 armor, unlike the shielded variant. They're a little bit more offensively oriented, and so they can't upgrade their armor, but very nasty nonetheless. Going to see 2 of them here on the battlefield today. Got some more of the Swan Guard over here to sort of mix things up, and then another couple companies of, or at least one other company here of the Hearthguard of Sirion. A little bit of a floating tower here. Try not to pay any attention to that. I believe to round off their force, they've also got a catapult, and that's going to be manned by some of the Hearthguard of Sirion. And then, of course, we have the Kinsmen of Ingwe, and that's going to be where the general is hanging out today. You can see a couple of Vanyar officers here. And then, God, I can't remember his name. He's the Herald of Manwë. I totally space on his name. But he's one of the Maiar, and you can see those golden eyes there. That's one of the smaller details that will help you pick out the Maiar units, and I hopefully have one of them dedicated to Tulkas to show you in the next little while, and that will be included in our final release. But in any case, Kinsmen of Ingwe, these are Vanyar noblemen, the default kind of bodyguard for Valinor. They're a little bit more numerous than the Maiar bodyguards, which will clock in at between 25 to 30 or so models. They only have 2 HP, but they can upgrade their armor, and they just make a really nice kind of middle ground. I believe they give +3 to nearby units. Valinor has some really strong morale buffing abilities, especially on their bodyguards. So yeah, something that you don't want to underestimate. And I think that's going to do for Valinor. They've got a nice little spread here between the Noldor, the Vanyar, and the Teleri. So you're going to see a little bit of everybody today. And then we're going to pop down here, take a look at the House of Feyenoord. They're a little bit bunched up. And they're going to be played by Tommy the Wise, who it must be said is one of the newer players on our Discord and one of the newer additions to our testing team. So it's really nice to see him getting some games in as well. So we've got at least 2 to 3 units here of the Archers of Amron, and they're going to have a single armor upgrade. We've also got a whole whack of Footmen of Amras with 2 armor upgrades. We've got the Shield Bearers of Hellevorn, some Footmen from the House of Beor, and they probably have their armor upgrade as well. And I think I can see some of the 2-handed Defenders of Aglon mixed in there as well, and they're going to have their armor upgrades. And I know for sure he has brought the Legendary Company to bear today against his enemies, and they're going to be a more heavily armored variant of the what are they? The 2-handed swordsmen. It's like Defenders of Aglon or something like that. They also have Fear. They've got Relentless, so they're just absolute meat grinders. And yeah, they do lack some of the things that the standard variant gets, however. They lose a little bit of melee defense, which makes them exceptionally vulnerable to armor piercing and cavalry charges, much more so than the other units. And they also do not have bonuses versus elephants, which most of the 2-handed units in Silmarillion do benefit from. So there are some drawbacks there, and there's definitely some well-contoured weaknesses as well. Mixed in here, we're going to have a couple of Rangers of Hellevorn. Unlike the Harassment Javelins in the form of the Mariners of Alqualande that we saw earlier, the Rangers of Hellevorn are a distinct type of javelin that is called, in sort of our mod nomenclature, Hunter Javelins. They're going to be best used against small units of bodyguards, heavily armored targets, and monsters. They are exceptional monster hunters. They move a little bit more slowly in midair than the Harassment Javelin, so it is possible for monsters to kind of bob and weave and, dodge or mitigate a lot of the damage. That being said, if you manage to catch somebody sleeping, or if you manage to pin down the monsters, which is much more possible now that we've changed mass on monsters, these javelins can be absolutely devastating and can destroy some very expensive units very, very quickly. Here they are, the Accursed of Alqualande in their glorious golden armor, with their rubies and all of these other wonderful, ostentatious accoutrements. I've also got at least 1 catapult here, crewed by some Footmen of Amaras. We've also got some mounted company of Kurufin, a couple units of them here, which is it's interesting to take Feyenoord in this kind of situation, because generally, and giving this to a newer player is also maybe a little bit going to be difficult on Tommy. And I'll tell you why. The House of Feyenoord, most of their infantry is really more tooled towards survivability, lasting for a really long time, outlasting their opponents, and giving the cavalry time to kind of play the field and just be really, really powerful. Units like the Mounted Company here are extremely powerful, very versatile, and they have really good survivability. One of the things that the Sons of Feyenoord does lack is some really strong offensively oriented units. Of course, they have the Defenders of Aglon, and they've got the Accursed of Alqualande and things like that, but they're a little bit more niche and better suited for like rush infantry builds and things like that. One of the things that they lack, of course, is that extra damage, but they also don't have a lot of armor piercing outside of those Hunter Javelins and the Javelins, of course, that some of their cavalry and the cavalry charges and things like that. So this will be interesting. They're definitely good on the defensive because, of course, they are very defensively minded, and you can bring quite a lot of infantry with that budget, but it'll be interesting to see how it works. Usually if I was playing the Sons of Feyenoord defensively in a siege, I would kind of want to work that into my overall strategy and like bring those units, those really strong mobility units, to bear in a more aggressive and yeah, mostly just an aggressive way. Like, you want to get out there and deal as much damage as you can with your cavalry, because your units overall are going to kill less than a lot of other units because of how defensively oriented they happen to be, and your lack of armor piercing and things like that and so forth. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how the defenders here fare against the more offensively minded factions facing them today. But let's go ahead, fast forward a little bit. I'll see you guys in a few minutes. I'm going to see what Team Red is bringing to the battle today. The first attacking army we're going to take a look at today is the House of Fingolfin. They're going to be played by Alexander 10Q, who's one of our tournament finalists and one of our developers as well. He's brought some Herdsmen of Dorloman. You can clearly see here that they are a detachment. It's one of the newer things that you can expect in the next iteration of the mod. Also got some Sons of Hurin mixed in here, that glorious, glorious silver model, and you can see the dragon helm of Dorloman being led by their leader, Hurin, the man himself. He's also got some Bladesmen of Barad Ithel. They've had a lot of changes in the last patch. This is probably something we'll go over in a little bit of another video, but needless to say, they have gone from heavy to medium infantry, and there's a lot of stat template bonuses and penalties that sort of apply there. Looks like we've also maybe got some two-handed swordsmen in there. No. Got a lot of Herdsmen. A couple full companies here. First, we've got some harassment javelins in the form of the Marines of Vinyamar, 2 of them hanging out right here. And this is one of the new units, which I think we've previewed a little bit already. But for those of you who missed it, these are the Dragon Guard of Doriath. They are another Edyne unit to give you the option, if you like, to really just bring a full Edyne build. A lot of players will swear by going full Edyne. Some of them like to mix in the Elven units, and some people, like me, are just completely insane and like to bring like a full Elven build, and so eschew these guys entirely. That being said, they are a nice little alternative to the Bladesmen. They're a little bit more offensively oriented, but they do pay for that in some defensive statistics. So the Bladesman Barrett Rifle can upgrade their armor from medium all the way up to heavy, whereas the Dragon Guard of Doriath cannot actually upgrade their armor at all. They are capped at 7. They've got less melee defense, less shield, but they do have higher damage, higher charge values, and of course some very nasty throwing axes that have higher than average range. So there's some trade-offs there to look at, and I'm really looking forward to fielding full Edyne units of the House of Hador, full Edyne armies rather, in the campaign once we get there. I've got some more Herdsmen of Doriath here as well. Sentries of Hithlum looking like 3 big ol' ugly pike blocks. One of the cool things to know about pikes coming into the new patch is that they have A, more numbers, and B, they have a passive shield value to sort of represent all of those pikes in the air, you know, maybe just getting in the way of arrows and sort of swatting things out of the way. That being said, it's not super substantial. It's about 1, so it's not really going to stop a lot, but it will add a little bit of extra survivability to these pike units so they don't have to worry about archer spam quite so much. Down in the back here, we've got a couple units of the Herdsmen of Hithlum. They have bows, but they're not really meant to be skirmishers. You can use them that way, and a lot of people in fact do, because their caps have gotten a little bit higher, and mid-tier units like the Herdsmen of Hithlum have been made a little bit more cheaper, but they don't have the longevity. They've got about 5 or 6 ammunition. They will burn through that super quickly. But then, of course, you've got some medium shock troops, which can be used in all manner of ways in Silmarillion, from anti-armor to anti-monster to anti-cavalry deterrence. So, super versatile. Love the Edyne in the House of Fingolfin. Moving on now to Alexander Tenku's Bodyguard and Legendary Company picks. We've got the Aidimo Aransar. These are the bodyguard of the High King Fingolfin himself, and quite fittingly, they're going to be the bodyguard unit for him today. You can see the house, or not the House of Fingolfin, rather High King Fingolfin himself hanging out there with his bodyguard. Let's take one more look at that model there, because it's absolutely beautiful. One of the many astounding creations of Castellan. Moving on here, we have another unit created by Castellan. This is the Legendary Company for the House of Fingolfin, the Arqueni Findicano. They've got armor-piercing arrows. They've got a little bit less range. They have very high melee defense, but they don't have the armor-piercing charge of the other Lancer unit, which they're sort of an alternate variant and loadout of. And they have some extra bonuses against elephants, but they are quite terrible against wargs and other cavalry, whereas the Lancers are not great against elephants, but they are quite good against wargs. The arrows that they have are very nice for zoning out heavy cavalry. It's one of those kind of ace-in-the-hole units that they can use against, say, the House of Feyenoord, for example, of which they are a very fierce rival. So that is something that could really come to the forefront today. But let's move on now from the House of Fingolfin to one of the center armies here, and that is going to be the glorious House of Finarfin. They're going to be played by Lord Belagos today. We've got some Wardens of Nargothrond detachments. For those of you unaware, detachments are just half-strength units that you pay half price for. So adds a little bit of versatility, a little bit of spice and flavor, and utility otherwise to your armies. Got a lot of the Swordsmen of Talathiern in here. These are really becoming the bread and butter unit of the House of Finarfin, whereas previously people just really leaned into the heavy units. Now I'm starting to see people build more mixed armies, or even just full medium, like mid-range, almost Roman Legion-esque armies out of the House of Finarfin, which I'm honestly really happy to see. It adds some much-needed spice and flavor to this infantry-only faction. So we've got a bunch of the Swordsmen of Talathiern in here, probably to the tune of, like, I would say at least 4 units of them there. So they make up the core of his army. We've got some Marksmen of Nargothrond here, very nasty with their split shots. They're also not half bad in close quarters as well. One of the things to note about archers in Silmarillion, just a little bit of tidbit here for people who want to jump into the new patch, is that lower tier archers don't have great morale responses, and they don't have higher as high morale, and they don't have as high overall melee stats as your higher tier archers are going to. So Marksmen of Nargothrond, unlike some of their mid-tier and lower-end counterparts in other factions, they could take, say, a cavalry charge to the rear and not, like, almost immediately break and run, whereas that's not going to be the case for, say, Thralls of Angband. And other mid-tier archers are going to be much more likely to break and flee in that sort of situation. So we've got two of them here, very nasty, lower range and ammunition, but of course they have the split shot that breaks into 3, so they can just be sort of machine guns, almost mobile pillboxes, if you will. Got some more Wardens of Nargothrond attachments over here. Then we're moving into the real meaty part of the army, some Wardens of Nargothrond. He's definitely got some defenders down here as well. Looks like we have 1, 2, possibly even nope, just 2 units here of the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond. These are going to be pike units, so they're going to benefit from a little bit of extra defensive stats, whereas the House of Fingolfin pikes are a little bit more offensively oriented. So they can upgrade their attack, whereas these units here, the Bridge Wards, can only upgrade their armor and can't upgrade their attack. So a little bit of added flavor there. I've also got Legendary Company, the Company of Prince Gwyndor. Really interesting unit. It's going to be playing host to General Turin Turambar with his little dwarf armor and his black sword in the back. The Company of Prince Gwyndor is, of course, named after Prince Gwyndor, who kickstarted the Battle of Unnumbered Tears with a very fateful charge into the heart of the hosts of Angband, and ultimately it led to the doom of both himself and the rest of his comrades at that battle. So, appropriately, this is a unit that has quite good armor. It's unbreakable, but it will also charge without orders if you're not too careful. And Prince Gwyndor himself is going to be leading them. You can see him there with that little ruby in the crest of his helmet. Also got a catapult here from Lord of Belegost, some Defenders of Talathirin. This is going to be one of the Hunter Javelin units. A great way to tell is Harassment Javelins have between 2 and 3 armor-piercing damage for their missiles, whereas Hunter Javelins are going to have 10. They're going to have 80 range as opposed to the 100 range of Harassment Javelins, and they're going to have 3 ammo as opposed to the 7 of the Harassment Javelins. So, yeah, good little way to tell them apart. The second company here of the Defenders of Talathirin, and to round it all off, we have some nasty, nasty units here. Most of the Nargothrond roster is a little bit more defensively oriented, as you've probably noticed. A lot of spears, some swords and things like that. Things that just generally don't have a really high base damage, or have inferior damage types against, slashing. Whereas this unit here, they have bonuses against monsters. They are appropriately named the Arqueni Mormagilwa because they are the Knights of the Black Sword, the Disciples of Turin Turambar. And they've got bonuses against elephants, so dragons and so forth, and they're also relentless. Unlike many of the other units that we've seen that have relentless, these guys can break and run, so you need to be careful with their morale. You can't just throw them into any situation and expect them to just fight forever. They've got medium armor. I think it's a little bit closer to heavy. I think they've got about 8 or so armor, but they're mostly melee defense focused, so that's something to note, as well as that they can be felled by missiles and things like that, since the armor value is a little bit lower on average than most of the Nargothrond roster. And now, let's pop on over here and take a look at the last 2 armies. This one is a little bit stand-outish in that it's not an elven faction. It is, in fact, an orcish army. The Horrors of Nandan Gorthab being played by Tundra's Fox today. He's got some Karangwi Brood Mothers. Big, nasty elephants, which will rip and tear their way through lines of infantry. They are, of course, elephants, and they are therefore subject to a lot of various dangers in the mod, from pikes to spearmen to two-handed units to hunter javelins. There's a lot of things that can bring these nasty ladies down, but of course they're very mobile. They can pick and choose their engagements. So if you get them into the right fight, they will just chew their way through a lot of infantry. There are, of course, 5 of them in a single unit, and they've got about 12 or so HP per model. So very difficult to bring down, except with the focus fire and the right soft and hard counters. Also have the Legendary Company, quite appropriately placed next to the Brood Mothers. This is more of a unique Broodmother called the Hungering Maw. There's only one of them. They attack more quickly. They have a greater radius. They're just overall better on a per model basis than the Karangwi Broodmother, but of course there's only one of them as opposed to 5. And one of the other unique features is that they have an acid spit that is body piercing and armor piercing as well. So you can do a lot of damage, wreak a serious amount of havoc with it. But of course there is one of them. It's very expensive, and if it gets focused down by, say, hunter javelins or hit by like a fiery catapult shot or whatever, it will instantly die. And unlike the other units, this one can go amok. So you can just do enough damage to it to send it just into a crazed feeding frenzy, and it will just run everywhere and basically not be useful or usable anymore. So lots of downsides to them, but also a lot of, I think, really nicely contoured bonuses. Here we have the Urish Abomination, which is unfortunately still suffering from some UV issues, so it is not supposed to look so derpy. I swear this is not the purpose of this unit. But in terms of battlefield role, it is a mobile and living artillery piece. This one's sort of a unique creation of my own, and the way I conceptualize it is that it tears, it's like a fallen Maiar that tears chunks of its own wretched, terrible body off, and it throws those fulminating rocks at its enemies, and ultimately is a fire artillery piece that you can use and have it be very mobile. And it's also a decent enough elephant monster when all is said and done. One of the significant things about fire is that it's best used against lightly armored targets and large blobs of infantry. Tundras Fox has also brought a core of his army, being the Dusa Manuthan Flesh Terrors. This is a bodyguard tier orc, and in fact one of 2 units with any sort of decent armor to speak of that is not a giant monster with a heavily gnarled hide. The Dusa Manuthan Flesh Terrors are 1 HP apiece, extremely expensive, very low in model count, but they do a ton of damage. They are relentless as well, and they can upgrade their armor. So you can make them extremely scary, but of course, hunter javelins will destroy them, artillery will destroy them, armor-piercing javelins in general can be very, very nasty for them. And they are not fearless, so they will rout if placed under enough pressure. That being said, it does take a lot to send the Flesh Feasters fleeing for the hills. Let's see, we've also got some Devourers of Children over here. This is a unit that, when I was making up the Nandan Gorthab faction roster, I was actually on a trip up island, and I was like listening to like spooky stories, and I was camping out in very remote places, and so this was sort of born of like some creepy stories and stuff that I read, and also kind of Bigfoot. I live on Vancouver Island, so it's Bigfoot sightings and like people who believe in Bigfoot are actually fairly common here. I'm not one of them, but yeah, that's kind of where it comes from. So we've got 2 units of the Devourers of Children. They are absolutely nasty. So think of them as trolls that can rout and that don't have a ton of armor. They have less HP per model than trolls. They have armor-piercing damage, which the trolls do not. But there's also a lot more of them. They can hide in forests. They cause fear, and they're very, very quick. That being said, obviously they don't have a ton of armor. They can rout, and they are extremely weak to cavalry charges. I think they have like a -8 or like a -9 penalty against all kinds of cavalry, which is something that the trolls do not. The trolls generally have bonuses rather against cavalry, whereas the Devourers have penalties. So yeah, that's the Devourers in a nutshell. And I don't think Tundras Fox has too much else. I think he's kind of playing the like utility role here. So he's brought a lot of like a nice core of elite infantry. And then he's got lots of monsters and things like that to support his allies, and a lot of mobility here as well. I think he's got 2 of the Dusa Manuthan hunting pack, 1 or 2 of them. They're more of a niche unit, but they can hide in long grass, which is a very common terrain type. I believe they cause fear. They are elephant class, so they can remove stakes, and they're not. They don't take say penalties against units that only have bonuses against horses, so they can be really good against, say, lancers, for example. They're armor piercing, they have a good charge bonus, and a small AoE attack. That being said, they can also rout. They do have multiple HP, but they don't have the greatest defensive stats. And there's a decent number of them, but yeah, they are definitely subject to being shot to pieces, run down by Lancer charges. So if they can get the jump on Lancers, they can tear them to pieces, but if Lancers get a nice charge off on them, then they can potentially kill them off. So there's a lot going for them either way. Obviously they can be very stealthy as well, and rear charges and stuff like that can be very, very nasty indeed. Finally, we've got 2 units here of the Karangwi Bloodgorgers. This is another one of the bodyguard tier units, so most of the orcs in general are not going to have almost any armor to speak of. The only units that do are the Flesh Feasters, which you've already seen, and the Bloodgorgers here. So don't get the wrong impression, Nandan Gorthab does not have a heavily armored roster. In fact, most of their orcish units are just trash tier fodder that don't have a lot of defensive capability, but are mostly offensively oriented and have good charge values and things like that. There's 2 of them here, and they've got about 5 HP each. They've got nasty charge bonuses. They've got those dual axes, so they just do huge amounts of damage in close quarters, but naturally there's not very many of them. They aren't shielded, so lots of missiles, armor-piercing arrows, armor-piercing projectiles, and things like that can bring them low fairly fast. That being said, they're not easy to pin down. They've got really good mobility, just a really nice all-around unit that does add a lot of flavor to the Nandan Gorthab faction. So we move on now to the 4th and final attacking army. We have the Guarded Realm of Doriath being played by Captain Gervais. He's got the legendary company here, the Tiot Lys Dannen. They no longer have an armor-piercing projectile. Instead, they have a shield breaker trait, which allows them to ignore half the shield value from the front. So they still can perform their role quite admirably, I think, against heavily armored units like the Sons of Feyenoord or like Angband and things like that. They've also gotten a little bit of extra ammunition, and overall, most throwing axes have been given extra damage as well. So yeah, really, really nice. One of the things they can't do, however, is upgrade their attack value on their axes, which most of the other Doriath axemen can do for like 5 gold. It's insanely cheap. And they also don't perform terribly well in deserts, being more of a forest-dwelling people, which is not something that other axe units have to worry about. Speaking of axe units, we have the Warriors of Region here. 2-handed axes, nasty charge values, really, really quick. A lot of the Doriath axemen in particular are much quicker than their counterparts in other factions. And they've got nasty charge values. They don't suffer from the same melee defense penalties. And of course, they are armor piercing. So very, very nasty indeed. 3 of them here. And they're going to be backed up with 3 of the Axe Guard of Region. Some of them have their armor upgrades, some of them do not. You can sort of see them side by side here. Axes being the specialty of Doriath, they are one of those unique units that can upgrade from basically like the absolute cusp of like medium to light. So they have about 5 or so armor, and they can upgrade that, I believe, twice to give them a grand total of 9, which ultimately puts them, you know, 1 armor point ahead of where they used to be in the current live patch, so 8 versus 9, but you do have to spend a little bit of extra money in order to get them up there. And in the meanwhile, they get lots of bonuses from being melee, or rather medium infantry, so they get extra melee defense and things like that. So ultimately, if you're willing to invest in them, you can kind of combine the strengths of medium and heavy infantry, but they are, as I said, a little bit more expensive. In the back here, we have some of the Sword Host of Region, more defensively oriented than the Axe Guard. They have better shield values and just better base armor values, and you don't have to pay any extra money to upgrade them at all. Then in the back here, we have 2 bodyguard picks. We've got the Cuthalim with their armor upgrades, and you can see Thengol hanging out in the back there. Thengol with his gray hair and his beautiful crown of horns. And then over here we have the Donath and Mablung. Nasty 2-handed maces named for, of course, Donna, or Mablung of the Heavy Hand, the captain of Doriath. So, nasty little army here. I think he's also got some other hidden units. He's got some Wardens of the Girdle, light infantry. He's definitely got some of the Spear Host out in front here. Yes, indeed. See a bunch of the Spear Host here. The detachments of the half-size units are harassment javelins, so they have armor piercing, and the other ones are just simply poison javelins that don't have anything in particular that's nice about them. They just have, it's a little bit of extra damage. They're called precursor javelins, so they're neither hunter nor harassment javelins. They just deal some damage, and they're not even like armor piercing or anything like that. I got some shield bearers of Region out in the front. Looks like 2 companies of. And they're going to be supporting some Rangers of the Girdle, looking like 2 companies of as well. So a very mid-tier focused army. The House of Feyenoord is quickly retreating up the hill here in order to take some defensive positions. And it looks like the Karangwi Broodmothers from Tundra's Fox are going to come and sort of take advantage of this. Not very gentlemanly, but let's go ahead and kick this battle off. I hope you guys enjoy. So we're going to kick this off with a little bit of a race against time here. You can see the Mithrim elves rushing to get themselves into position, while Fingolfin sensing blood in the water. And this is actually a kind of cool tactical consequence, I suppose, of the way that the Blades of Nargothrond now work, is that they're actually very fast. Especially for units that can upgrade to heavy armor, they're just very, very quick, and you can see them rapidly getting into position here. And catching the Mithrim elves a little bit unawares. Nice little cheeky charge from the rear here. Definitely going to punish them, kill about 20% of the unit there in fairly short order before Mevin is able to pull them out again. And that's going to be followed up with some more stubborn kind of sticking units here. Bergsman of Doriath charging into battle here in support of the Blades of Nargothrond. And they're going to be going toe-to-toe with these units. And oh yeah, that's the custom projectile here at work. You can see those crystal arrows just being absolutely devastating. So there is a bit of a trick to using them. As I mentioned earlier, you need to be able to like get the right angle, get the right distance, and things like that. You can see some of the shots kind of going overhead here, and then they end up just missing, partially because of the elevation. But I have to say that the Mithrim player has done a really good job at getting himself rapidly into position, and Fingolfin definitely didn't make that easy at all. So Marines of Feyenoord trying to take position here, and they're going to be able to rain down hell and destruction upon the sword bearers of Mithrim and the rest of that Mithrim line here, unless Mithrim can bring some support here to bear. You can see a lot of the Mithrim army is still kind of flagging behind, trying to get themselves quickly into position. So Fingolfin did a great thing here, trying to catch them off guard, and they are able to capitalize on it a little bit. So let's go ahead and speed things up here. You can see, what some of the consequences of that are going to be. The Marines of Feyenoord trying to get themselves set up, and they want to be fast here. There are more reinforcements from Mithrim sort of bearing down, and the bannerets of the hither shore are now being pulled out, and they're going to be thrown against the Marines of Feyenoord in fairly short order here. So Alexander wants to, take advantage of that, but I think it's going to be a little bit too late. I think he wasted quite a number of precious moments here. But instead, he's going to go after the bannerets of the hidden shore. They're going to activate that charge bonus and just flatten the poor Marines of Feyenoord there. Some sword infantry are pretty good at taking these charges from the front, but the bannerets of the hither shore hit like absolute trucks. And of course, the Marines of Feyenoord are not infantry, so their melee defense is a good deal lower. The approach of the Scions of Tuor is going to be enough to send these Marines back down the hill under some pretty heavy fire here, and more reinforcements are being brought forward. Dragon Guard of Doriath, of course, are here acting as a sort of more elite rear guard. And actually, they'd be really good to use against the Scions of Tuor, and I think Mevin maybe realizes that. Oh, yeah, it's a little bit too late, though. Scions of Tuor already coming under fire. None of them died that time, but definitely some of that HP was shaved off. Let's pass on now to the middle here. You can see the Nargothrond is being moved forward, bring out some of their hidden units, Stalkers of Talon and Feyenoord, being used to catch these Swan Guard of Aqualande here a little bit off guard. One of the things we didn't note during the deployment phase was the Sentries of Aqualande. There's going to be a couple of them nearby as well. Some light bowmen. They're going to do, okay-ish. A lot of the Nargothrond army here is quite heavily shielded, quite heavily armored, so it's not really going to be the best for them. And of course, the marksmen of Nargothrond are going to easily shred their way through them. That being said, maybe they'll get in the way and waste a little bit of ammunition. That's probably the best you can hope in this kind of engagement. Stalkers of Talon and Feyenoord, very swiftly overwhelming. The Swan Guard of Aqualande. Swan Guard and things like that don't have the greatest morale responses. A lot of the Talarian units, in fact, do not. It's sort of the downside to the Talarian roster as a whole is that they can be scattered quite easily unless they have some of the more powerful units nearby to boost their leadership. And so these Swan Guard are going to be swept from the field in fairly short order. Durian Defenders here being brought to bear. Meridas of Aqualande, they definitely have something to say about that, and they just shredded their way through about 20% of that unit in just a few moments. And I think Lord of Beligos has kind of realized his folly, but he's kind of committed now. They're going to turn their backs here, and they're going to take a couple of extra volleys, and that's just going to be so ugly for them. And they're going to be brought from about 120 down to, I think, about 75 or so models. More of the Marines here have been brought to bear on the other side. Dawn is just doing excellent work here at shredding through a lot of this Fingolfin chaff. And there's a lot of Fingolfin units that can take quite a beating, and they can bring some pretty serious numbers, which is quite appropriate for Fingolfin owning the larger territory of all the Northern Kingdoms. But he's doing an excellent job here of sort of separating the meat from the bone, and under this kind of pressure, Lord of Belagos is going to have to bring a lot of more important stuff forward in order to keep up his momentum, which will potentially create even more opportunities for Dawn to exploit as time goes by. Swordsman of Tal'Dirion here really giving it to these light infantry. Swan Guard of Alcalon, they took that volley at close range, and they lost about 20 or so models in fairly rapid succession. Now the Mariners have run out of ammunition, so the pressure here is going to ease up a little bit on Belagos' front line, so he's probably going to be forced to commit more of his heavy infantry to the battle. That being said, looks like there's a lot more contingents of those blue cloaked light infantry. Over here in the east, it appears that things are quite quiet for the time being. It looks like maybe some of the... Yeah, those are definitely Feyenoord troops here. It looks like they got fried by the Urush abomination. I think it's going to take some pot shots at the massed ranks here of the Feyenoord army. But for the most part, it's just fire, which, you know, most other Elven factions would certainly fear, but not Feyenoord. They're able to stand stalwart and brave in the face of that fiery onslaught. And the Shield Bearers of Hellborn here in their shield wall formation, forming the front line. And there's all manner of horrors here forming up as the vanguard of that Doriath assault. It's very interesting to see these two factions fighting together. Nandan Gorthab is very much conceived to be a pain for Doriath in the early game of the campaign, but now they've sort of put their differences aside and they are taking on their hated enemy, the the Sons of Feyenoord. I think that fiery ball of death is going to land right here, right in the middle. I don't know. Let's see what happens. There we go. There we go. Cooking a few of those of the Shield Bearers of Hellborn, some of those brave men of House Bayor. Gonna take that on the chin, but all in all, with the armor and with everything else, yeah, they're just really gonna be nonplussed. Probably the most vulnerable unit is, in fact, the Rangers of Hellborn, but in this formation, yeah, it's gonna be pretty easy to mitigate the damage from that living artillery piece. Some good tactics here, just sort of waiting out the storm, it would appear. A lot of red armored, heavily armored and shielded units are going to be just... They're going to have a great time here fighting against a lot of these Nandan Gorthab units, and they're not going to care about that fire at all. Passing on over to the middle, things are getting real ugly here. Swordsmen of Tal'Dirion slowly but surely hacking their way through battalion after battalion of the Swan Guard of Alcalonde. They're really just meat shields, and they're kind of just here to play chaff. And pin things in place so that missiles and other units can be brought to bear. Mariners of Alcalonde going toe-to-toe with Stalkers of Talon and Falroth. I think they're going to win this just through sheer strength of numbers. Also, some Swan Guard over here pairing off against the Swordsmen of Tal'Dirion, who have been brought up in support. And it's just a wet noodle fight for the most part. Spearmen versus, you know, mid-tier swordsmen. Nothing particularly special happening over here, but I have a feeling... Oh yes, I do. That this is where it's going to be very, very nasty. So brave of Fingolfin to just rush up here, and I really love the impetus, and I love people taking the initiative like this. But now Mithrim has kind of got things under control, and you can see those crystal arrows just raining down death here upon the Sentries of Hithlum. Good thing they have that shield bonus there, but it is not going to save them against just all that massed fire. Marines of Vinyamar here trying to even things out in the center. The chaff medium units are taking some pretty nasty losses. Bladesmen of Barrett Eichel, however, have been in this fight for quite a while, taking some shots from behind, rear charges from cavalry and things like that, and they are now on the verge of breaking down, which is never something that you want to see. Those are high-tier swordsmen. Breakdown in discipline usually means that things have gone very, very poorly indeed. Over here, looks like both sides are kind of beginning to tire out between the pikes and everything else. This is really a wet noodle fight here as blocks of chaff are butting up against one another. I've got some of the elders of the Twilight Hearth up here, raining down death and destruction. But it seems like up here, where the Dragon Guard are leading the charge, the House of Fingolfin is really starting to make some progress. That being said, Sword Bearers over here, charging in support of the Hewing Guildsmen. I think this might be where the men of House Hador have met their match. Now, the Dragon Guard should have no problem carving their way through chaff like the Sword Bearers of Mithrim. You can already see them getting to take losses. This poor guy getting eviscerated here. And the Dragon Guard moving on to hack his way through one of the nearby guildsmen. But, yeah, numbers here are starting to tell. It looks, oh yeah, those silver arrow, or the crystal arrows rather, just scything their way through the ranks of the herdsmen. Unfortunately, Alexander did not put them in to loose formation, and he is really paying the troll tool here as a result. Those herdsmen are just taking it on the chin like true Romans, but it's going to be all for naught here. They're just being absolutely destroyed, and they're not even managing to get all of their ammunition off, whereas these herdsmen over here are doing, not too badly. I think Alexander definitely wants to throw that ammunition, get it out there as quickly as possible, and then throw them up here and try not to lose the gains that his Dragon Guard have paid so dearly in order to get him. Now, Elders of the Twilight Hearth, they are going toe-to-toe with the Dragon Guard, and I think the losses that they've incurred here really should give you some idea about the offensive prowess of these Dragon Guard. That being said, they don't really have the numbers to continue this, and they are about to be fully encircled and potentially shot to death by more of these Bane of the Incomer regiments who are forming up in the back. Mevin is holding on very nicely here. He's got some reserves in the center, some more sword bearers, and some Elders of the Twilight Hearth here who are out of ammunition. And he is just really giving it to these more lightly armored Edain units. And this is kind of where the Edain can really struggle. So where they're losing combat or they're struggling in combat, they're being shot with missiles since they are a little bit less well armored than the Noldor, because of course they are. And where they're getting more and more tired because they just don't have the fatigue and the longevity in melee that the Elven units do. This is where mass routes can happen, and I think we're already starting to see some routing take place here. Yeah, the herdsmen are running for it, and I think the sentries are probably not long for this world as well. So we're starting to see the cracks in that strong Edain build begin to form a little bit here, whereas the elves are much more able to kind of fight for longer. That being said, it's an ugly fight. Look at this. Just destruction on an absolutely catastrophic scale. A lot of elves and men dead on either side. It looks like the Dragon Guard have finally been repulsed. You can see the last remnants of them here really struggling. And you can see the difference in quality too, I think, between the Dragon Guard and the other herdsman units. These are high-tier warriors, and they will fight hard for much longer. They have better fatigue traits and things like that. Even in the face of, I think they're getting javelined here. Now they're just getting pincered. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, they're fighting on. Tired, outnumbered, and losing combat, doing very well for themselves as human guildsmen. They've had enough of these Marines of Vinyamar. They're going to get maybe one more good volley off here that's going to cut down a few of them. But I think they're going to be able to activate their charge bonus, and now these Marines are going to be not long for this world. They're going to charge right through the Dragon Guard, breaking what remains of their lines. I think this might be where these mighty hand-picked warriors of Hurin Thalion himself are going to meet their end and potentially even rout off. So things are starting to wind down there for the House of Fingolfin. They're really taking it on the chin. More reinforcements are certainly going to be needed. Meanwhile, over here, the lightly armored units, no, I thought we had the legendary company here. The lightly armored units are going toe-to-toe with some of the more heavily armored troops from Nargothrond, and this is becoming more of a very one-sided general engagement. So these light troops are not going to be able to hack their way through Wardens of Nargothrond. Not effectively. The Hearthguard and things like that, they'll be able to do a little bit better, but we're going to see, I think, one of Valinor's big weaknesses, and that's much like the Sons of Feyenoord. They don't have access to a lot of armor piercing. They do have some slingers that have maces. They will have a Maiar unit that has maces as well. But for the most part, Valinor does not do well when it comes to hacking their way through extremely heavily armored units. So in terms of a matchup here, Valinor versus Nargothrond in a grindy fight like this, it's really going to come down to how you use your missile units. And I think that's going to be kind of the big determining factor here, which I think is good. In an infantry-focused mod like Silmarillion Total War, I think it's important to have those sort of like tactical uses for your supporting units that can really just shift the infantry fight elsewhere, back and forth in your favor and potentially against you. So more quality units being committed here. It looks like the Sentries of Alcalon are being thrown in as well. I think Dawn is just trying to keep his really strong units in reserve for at least as long as he can. And trying to wear down his enemy just with like sheer numbers, especially when they have to fight uphill like this. It's not the worst idea, and I think that Nargothrond and Valinor, in this kind of situation, they're going to grind each other down into dust. Like, it's just going to be nothing left of both sides. Peacekeepers of Valinor up here, and we've also got at least 2 companies, I think, of the Feyenoord that haven't been committed to the fray yet, and that's going to be very, very scary for Nargothrond. That's like everything that they hate: high melee defense, high damage, and armor piercing as well. Meanwhile, over here, Doriath and Nandan Gorthab versus Isles of Fingolfin. It's more of an extended skirmish fight here. You can see the archers of Amrod are just lining the hills, simply bristling with those Noldoran archers, and they're just laying down the pain here against rangers of the girdle and things like that. I personally, if I was Tommy the Wise, I would not really be using my ammunition on these guys. I'd be saving it for sure. Either for some fire ammunition, maybe to use against the Karangri Broodmothers, or the what's-it-called? The Hungering Maw, which can potentially make it panic and run, or I'd be using it against Wardens of the Girdle, or especially the Warriors of Region. You can see that just by looking at Rex's army and kind of sizing it up, he's put a lot of money and resources into Warriors of Region and into Axguard. Some of the Axguard don't have their armor upgrades, and Axguard generally have lower shield values than the other more defensively oriented units like the Spears and the Shields of Region. So I would be saving my arrows for that rather than using them on some of these Rangers and things like that. The Rangers are really not a threat. Tyrion Lystanen, it'd be nice to be able to put some pressure on them, and other units here like the Spear Host of the Girdle and things like that. They don't have the greatest shield value, and yeah, that's something that I would try and pressure as well. Mounts Company here, charging into the front of the Spear Host. Honestly, it seems like crazy talk, but if you can catch hybrid units like this without their spear secondary weapon, I don't think they actually get a lot of the benefits, and they take a lot of time to switch over from one to the other. So lightning strikes like that can actually do a lot of damage, and I think this has kind of been shown there. About 10 or so models dead on the ground in exchange for maybe 1 or 2 cavalry. And units like the Mounted Company are especially able to do that well. That being said, I would probably be using my mounted units a little bit more differently, maybe trying to outflank in the center here, or maybe even support Mithrim, who I think has run into a second wave here. We've got the best of Fingolfin, who are now clashing against these mid-tier units, as well as some support here in the form of the Devourers of Children. And they're going to be able to smash their way through quite a lot of these mid-tier units before they ultimately crumble. And you can see some Karangri Broodmothers and, or rather some Karangri Bloodgorgers teaming up with the Arquendi Findicano, and they're really starting to give Mithrim a run for their money. They've certainly got the numbers and things like that, but as they move forward to sort of envelop what remains of Fingolfin and try and crush this last little bastion, the mobile elements of the other armies, like the cavalry here, are going to be able to take advantage of that. And now you can see that they've managed to sucker one of these sentry units out of position here, and Hunter's Fox is going to deftly take advantage of that and crash into both sides of this shield wall. And just watch the carnage that ensues here. Trapped between a rock and a hard place, or perhaps, trapped between 2 falling boulders, these Karangri monsters are just descending on them from both sides, and the Bloodgorgers are really living up to their name here, and just swatting aside these medium spearmen. And now with this big gap in the lines here, Mevin's going to try to cover it with those elders, but they're just going to be a little bit too slow, and the Arquendi Findicano are going to be able to slip through their lines and potentially be used in some pretty decisive ways. So I think now would be a good time for Feyenoord to maybe send some of their cavalry in here, because there's a lot of these units that are either weak to cavalry or weak to their particular brand of cavalry. So Mithrim definitely needs some support here, and I think at the moment a lot of those Feyenoord units are just kind of sitting in support. Yeah, you can see that right here, Mounted Company. So I would definitely be throwing them over here as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you're going to be in quite a lot of trouble. That being said, still some reserves and other things like that up here, so all hope is not lost. We have the catapult here from the Hearthguard, and Kinsmen of Ingwe, Sentinels of Tyrion, and all kinds of other nasty things that are in this sort of center second line up there. Peacekeepers of Valinor doing quite well here, and you can see the Nargothrond is slowly but surely being ground to a halt in the center. That being said, I think the Arqueni Findicano might have something to say about it. Now, it is worth noting that horse archers like this just don't have the same kind of damage values as more like dedicated melee cavalry, lancers even. They just don't really hold a candle to them. But getting rear charges in Silmarillion Total War is extremely impactful. A lot of units, with the exceptions of certain factions and certain units, don't have a ton of armor, and a lot of their like stat budgets get front-loaded onto their melee defense. So shield is a little bit lower, but melee defense is quite high, and armor is a little bit lower. So you're going to see that here, and what the impact of that can be. Or even like, you know, charging into the rear of some heavy units, and it's gonna be noticed. A lot of these are 2 HP infantry, and they just immediately got cut down. And it's obviously not something that you want to happen. So Valinor was just, they were crushing it here. And now Feyenoord has, you know, to their credit, they've brought in some support, and the Arqueni Findicano are just being handily repulsed. They're basically enveloped here. There's no way that this unit is going to be able to escape. There's cavalry in here, there's Plaza Guardians, and so the center, at least, is looking pretty good for the defenders. Now, Doriath is sending in... Oh, never mind, it's not Doriath, but the Fingolfin player, instead, is sending in some of his Arqueni Mormagilwa. They're going to be real good for hacking their way through Peacekeepers of Valinor, and it's going to take them a little bit of time, but if any unit can do it, and do it quickly and efficiently, it is going to be the Arqueni Mormagilwa. They have the damage, they are relentless, they've got everything that they need there to potentially penetrate the center of this line. As the last of the Arqueni Findicano begin to fall. Ooh, hacking down with one of those melee cavalry there. Very surprising indeed. Plaza Guardians could probably be getting in there a little bit more quickly. Meridas of Aquawande way up there in reserve. But these mounted company definitely need to be brought over in this direction. You can see most of Mithrim here has actually been handily dealt with by that second wave. Oh, nasty. You can see the result of the Hungering Maw there, spitting its fiery projectile. Knocked over a lot of those units. Not all of them died. It doesn't necessarily do a ton of damage against, you know, single units. But if you can get nice enfilades with it, you can do lots of damage. You can be super disruptive, and it can just radically alter the way that combat ends up playing out. So somehow, miraculously, some of these herdsmen of Hithlum have managed to hold on. And what remains of the Mithrim host is trying to rally together around the Elders of the Twilight Heart. Another nasty fiery spit coming in there from the Hungering Maw. And it is going to rapidly reposition because it does not want to get entangled with those hewing guildsmen of Androth. If they can surround it, they can do a ton of damage. Now the Devourers of Children got absolutely smashed to pieces. There's like 2 units of them. It's like 40 models of 6 HP monstrous infantry. And they're basically all gone at this point. The Krangly Bloodgorgers haven't lost too many models, but they've certainly taken a lot of damage. Many of these ferocious, bloodthirsty monsters are actually quite appropriately covered in blood. Adimo Adantar still, you know, fighting the good fight. And what remains of Mithrim, this is kind of their final stand here. They're going to charge in the battle against the light infantry, the Wardens of the Girdle, and they're actually not doing amazing. They've got the monsters of Nandan Gorthab bearing down upon the rear, the Wardens of the Girdle pressing them in from all sides, and the Hungering Maw just relentlessly spitting into them. Mevin really wants to take that Maw down if he can, but unfortunately I think this is going to be the end here for Mithrim. That being said, this struggle was heroic, and Mevin got into position. He knew exactly what he needed to do. He blocked off Fingolfin's very aggressive advance, and he rebuffed that entire army, just completely tore them to shreds. And then he had to come up here against a lot of other nasty surprises, and it was that second wave that broke him. But you really can't fault him there. He did play this quite well, and his teammates probably should have sent him some support a little bit earlier on once he had more of those units. If the Mounted Company of Kudufin were able to get over here more quickly, this would have been, I think, a very, very different fight. They could have taken it to the Krangly Bloodgorgers. They could have surrounded the Hungering Maw, potentially routed it off. Like, there's a lot that could have been done there. So, unfortunately, Mithrim has fallen, but they put up a hell of a fight. Over here in the center, things have been opened up for the defenders, but it's not going well. The Mounted Company are up there. They're raining down death and destruction upon these Nargothrond units, and they have just had the majority of their army has been just torn to pieces. Valinor is super, super strong, especially on the defensive. And because of their high budget as well, there was really no way the Nargothrond was going to be able to win a conventional fight here. That being said, the cracks are starting to show a little bit. Meritor's of Aquilonda here, and the other later units are holding down the wings, but in the center, that's where the big push is coming from. Over here, Mounted Company of Fingolfin. Looks like they might be heading to the aid of their friends over there. Some more Mounted Company coming over this way. There goes the Mithrim General, and that's basically going to be GG for Mithrim at this point. A lot of cavalry forming up over here. Hopefully they get sent down here. It might be a bit of a vain gesture at this point, but kind of hard to say. Others of the Twilight Hearth, the last bastion of the Elves of Mithrim, managing to skewer a few of these monsters, but I think with the addition now of the Hungering Maw charging in there, this is basically going to be the end for those Elders. But that being said, it's not a huge breach, right? Like, there's not a lot that the attackers can really bring through here because of how well Mevin managed to hold his own ultimately. The resulting destruction here has destroyed at least one army and, you know, mauled reinforcements from another. Yeah, very, very well done to Mevin there. Nothing to be ashamed of at all. Meanwhile, what do we got over here? Got some Peacekeepers of Valimod and some Plaza Guardians. That could be more than enough, like a big old ball of spears. I think that would be more than enough here to deal with everything that's coming their way. But we'll see. You know, you have to, in tandem with the Mounted Company of Fingolfin, like if these two players work together, they can shut this down. Like, no problem, no problem. They just got to be aggressive, they got to be, you know, swift and decisive, and things will, I think, work out pretty nicely. Meanwhile, over here, sort of a dead man's, like a DMZ, you know, dead man's zone between both factions. I think Tommy might be a little bit distracted here, so Rex is actually able to get some spear host up here into position to actually threaten the Archers of Amrod, which is quite surprising. Not something that I think really should be allowed to happen. He's got the reserves. There's like no reason that, you know, Rex should be able to get up here and be this much of a pain. But there's a tiny little spear host with the girdle. So it looks like they're going to go on a suicide mission here, charge into the rear of the Archers of Amrod, and punish Tommy for not paying attention. So it sucks for him, but that's what's going to happen. Catapult here from the Valinor player being sent to the aid of his ally. Still a lot of reserves here. If I was... Ooh, nasty. That's going to be ugly. The Valinor player definitely wants to get down here. So those Devourers are going to die like almost instantaneously. I would personally let them, you know, stay in here and kind of fight it out with the Blood Gorgers. And they're surrounded. They're, you know, tired out. I think that they could be defeated quite handily here. Now with the Peacekeepers of Valimod coming in from the rear, this could be the end for some really expensive Nandan Gorthab units. Although the Mounted Company on their own seem to be quite deftly handing these guys their giant bulbous bottoms, and I think they're going to be handily repulsed. Yeah. So despite the fact that Mevin was defeated, this little gap here in the lines is actually going to be quite quickly filled up. The bleeding will be staunched, and unless Rex can get in behind these troops here. But over in the center, it's kind of hard to tell. Oh no! The Hungering Maw! See, this is huge. Really nice shot there. Very disruptive. Gonna, you know, keep a lot of those units busy. The Hungering Maw probably should get some of the cavalry here sicked on it as quickly as possible. I think Tommy maybe sees that and he's going to bring his Mounted Company over here. But those Blood Gorgers, absolutely devastated. The Mounted Company should probably be sent after the Wardens of the Girdle. They could be routed off very, very quickly. Although the Peacekeepers seem to be kind of on track to do that, so maybe it'd be a good idea to bring both the Mounted Company over here as quickly as possible. And you don't want... Yeah, see? The Hungering Maw, you don't want him just being able to kind of chew his way through the lines. Melee cavalry like that are a really good answer to the Hungering Maw, so I think Tommy needs to be a little bit more aware of what's going on here. Some map awareness would certainly go a long way to helping the Blessed Realm here stay in the game. Now, they are still doing okay, and if they can get some reinforcements over here, as you know, a little bit more quickly, it seems that Dawn has kind of lost micro on some important units here as well, and I think there's Where's the two-handed spears? Yeah, they're going to be over here as well, so they need to move. Like, they don't need to be in this sort of, like, walkie, or the walkie formation, the spear wall formation. They need to be running, and Tommy needs to be, like, actively trying to prevent this encirclement from happening here, because you can see some really elite units, like the Peacekeepers of Valinor, who are winning, now being routed off. Plaza Guardians in the center here, doing very well. And now I think Nandan Gorthab smells blood in the water, so a big influx of monsters heading over this way. Reinforcements definitely needed here, and yeah, the Mounted Company are just kind of walking around, not really doing anything important. And there's a lot of reinforcements over here that could be brought to bear. Now, Doriath has moved in, and so Tommy, of course, has his kind of hands full, but there's lots of reserves and stuff here that should be brought to bear. So Tommy is kind of like fighting his own battle here, I guess, while his allies are really kind of struggling, and we saw that with Mithrim over there. Like, Mithrim might have been able to be saved, and then they'd have all that extra manpower here. If Feyenoord or Valinor, Valinor could just as easily have sent some reinforcements over there to kind of relieve things and get rid of some of the pressure on the poor Mithrim elves. But now Valinor is the one who's really struggling here and really in need of support. And there's just no support that's forthcoming. Instead, Tommy is actually recalling a lot of his troops over here to help himself out when he doesn't really need it, I think, nearly as much as his allies in the center. So some questionable decisions there, but it is what it is. Well, those Peacekeepers definitely need a little bit of support. And I think Valinor has more troops. They've got their bodyguard, question mark, somewhere. Where is that bodyguard? Oh my goodness. Where have they gone? I'm sure he's still got them somewhere. Ah, yes, here they are. And so, again, Dawn being a little bit slow to react. Like, he needs everything over here, because if he has everything, he can form like a big old death ball and, kind of wipe out the rest of these troops here. And Tommy should definitely be sending him some reinforcements. Like, this is a big problem. Where Mithrim died and then they were able to, stop that, they should have immediately shifted over here, because this is a much bigger issue. Like, this needs to be stopped for sure. Plaza Guardians are not going to be able to catch those Karagvi Broodmothers. Instead, they're going to need something more mobile, like Tommy's cavalry, for example. And now over here, the poor catapult guardsmen getting caught out by the Udrish Abomination and a large number of the Dusmanuthan hunting packs. They are quite good at hunting down cavalry, or not cavalry, but rather artillery and things like that. And with the support of the Fire Abomination, like, there's no contest there. And still, Tommy's just kind of fighting his own one-man battle here against Doriath. So a little bit left to be desired, I think, in terms of the map awareness. But ultimately, percentages are still pretty close, and the defenders are ahead a little bit here. Now it's the company of Prince Gwyndor here, not having the greatest time, and Valinor has managed to form, a contiguous line, and they are sort of pushing them back a little bit. But yeah, let's see, with the Hungering Maw there, just able to spit and just be a big pain. And now with the Dusmanuthan hunting packs able to come in from the rear, all these beasties in from behind. They definitely don't want to get anywhere near the Plaza Guardians, because the Plaza Guardians will absolutely devastate them. But the Peacekeepers are a much juicier target, and I think Tundra's Fox recognizes that. And now in go the Dusmanuthan hunting packs. And they are going to absolutely shred the rear of these units. This is exactly how you want to use them. Some monsters rushing in support. Now the Peacekeepers of Valinor, who are winning this fight, are now just getting absolutely overwhelmed and destroyed. These Plaza Guardians over here doing pretty decently against the Prince Gwyndor. Like, normally they'll be able to destroy them. Looks like Captain Gervais was actually able to break off some troops from over here, skirt around the Feyenoordian position, and now he's going to get into the rear of the Peacekeepers, and this is basically going to be all over but the crying for these poor units. These Vanyar can just be so destructive, but they're just getting squeezed in on all sides. There's nearby routing units, there's lots of fear, and I don't think they're going to be very long for this world. And indeed, they are going to break there. That's a lot of pressure to put onto one unit. So, you know, of course, and quite naturally, they will break in that situation. And now Tommy is almost completely alone. I think there's a couple Valinor units still remaining. Yeah, Sentinels of Sirion are over here. So a little bit of support still remains from Valinor. For the most part, he's completely alone. And these cavalry have just kind of been sitting here. Like, there's a lot of things they could be used to do right now. And unfortunately, they're just... It seems that Tommy is not too sure. I think there's potentially... Being a newer player, you know, they're not... He's maybe thinking they're not Lancers, right? What can I do with them against infantry? Well, there's actually quite a lot that you can do with the Mounted Company. We saw just how painful a Horse Archer unit was when getting those rear charges and things like that. So yeah, there's quite a lot that they can do. Kinsman of Ingwe here, and the Mounted Company of Fingolfin can still do quite well together. But like, look at this! Like, they're just sitting there. They should be used to fight these units and to get over here and to lend a little bit of support. So it's a little bit disappointing because there was like some really good teamwork from the defenders early on. It's a little bit disappointing for me to see it kind of break down like this. Like, Tommy needs to get in there. He needs to support his allies, and these Kinsmen of Ingwe were so important, and they just got destroyed here because he was just kind of sitting around, you know, picking his nose and not really doing anything. So it's unfortunate. What we got over here? Now we're running the horses through a pile of these Doriath spears, which is very unfortunate. A nice little rear charge here into the Company of Prince Gwendor will actually hurt. And it's nice to see these horsemen being used proactively, but there's also still allies that need support over this way. And there are like infantry units and things like that that could have been thrown in. I think there's definitely an overcommittal here too. Like, I understand not wanting to have your line broken, for sure. But I would have used some of the Archers of Amarok in tandem with the Mounted Company of Fingolfin to like lend help to these two very scary, very elite infantry units over here. But unfortunately, that just wasn't forthcoming. So now the Mounted Company getting denied their charge, being denied their mobility. Crangry Broodmothers in their rear, causing fear, taking big bites out of these units, and I think these Mounted Company are going to be not too long for this world. Now, there's the possibility of, you know, getting a rear charge over here and maybe saving this unit, but Tommy's just has lost micro on them. He's just not really paying attention here, and so a really important asset is actually getting destroyed. Down goes the Herald of the Valar, and that is going to be it for the Valinor General. Sentinels of Sirion, just through sheer brute force, are actually doing quite nicely here. But now the Nargothrond Spearmen have arrived on scene, and the use for this cavalry is going to be very, very severely limited. Again, Tommy losing micro here, going to get charged in the rear by some armor-piercing spearmen, and I think he's going to lose both of his cavalry units. I'm not too sure what he's doing. There's not really a lot for him to micro right now, so I don't know, maybe he had a notification on his phone or something. But yeah, there's just not really a lot for him to micro right now, so I don't really understand why these Mounted Company are being used so poorly right now. Now, they're going to bug out, but like, there's really nowhere else for them to go. I think they might go for another like rear charge here against the Company of Prince Gwendor. Or they're going to... Okay, they're finally going to move over here to try and support these units, but they should have been used quite a while ago. There's a nice open rear charge here. Even if he's just baiting a charge, like having the Warriors of Region try to countercharge and turn their back to the Sentinels is in itself, you know, a nice little tactic that can swing that battle without the Mounted Company even having to touch that infantry unit. Now, it looks like he's managed to kill off the Urush Abomination, which is great. That brings down the Nandan Gorthab General. He's also killed the rest of those Karangwi units. But now is the time, right? Now is the time to get over here, try and free up the Sentinels of Sirion. But they're going to get sandwiched, unfortunately, by some Wardens of the Girdle. Now, they may be exhausted, but the Wardens getting a nice rear charge will deal a lot of damage to these Sentinels, and I think they're going to get counter-charged. No, the Wardens will end up getting their charge off there, and they're going to get Blender Lorded, but yeah, support is definitely needed here. And Tommy's just wasn't able... Yeah, see, these units are just kind of sitting around, not really doing anything decisive or important. Tommy doesn't seem to be able to free up his allies' units. He seems to be maybe trying I think because he's a Reforged player, like maybe he's trying to get in behind here because of the way the cavalry works in Reforged. Like you can, you know, crush half a unit or something in a charge. But when you're charging into the front of units like this with just like melee cavalry, you know, you're not really gonna do a whole lot. And then they're gonna get countercharged, of course, by the Warriors of Region, who are gonna side their way through the armor of the Mounted Company, and this is just gonna turn really ugly really quickly. So a little bit of mismanagement here. It looks like these footmen of Amras have actually broken off the fight, and slowly but surely Doriath is being able to cut their way through here. So as I mentioned earlier on in the deployment phase, if you're gonna play Feyenoord, you definitely want to use your cavalry aggressively and decisively, and you want to integrate that overall into your team strategy if you are playing defensively. If you're playing offensively as well, honestly, that's just where the House of Feyenoord does their best work. It looks like some of the Flesh Feasters and stuff like that actually broke themselves against the Feyenoord line. But yeah, you want to be able to use that cavalry well. You want to be able to, you know, be offensive and do all the things that you need to do to sort of capitalize on the strength of your infantry, which is largely centered in their ability to hold. And to hold the line, they will. As you can see here, this very thick red line, but slowly but surely being thinned out, is doing fabulous. They've actually managed to like rebuff the advance from this hill. They're now pushing down here. The big problem is that there's obviously these units in behind them, and that they don't have the support of their allies any longer. Their allies had some really nasty units, such as, for example, the Sentinels of Sirion, and they had the Kinsmen of Ingwe, but those were just completely destroyed, and that didn't have to be the case. Of course, if the cavalry was brought in there, they would have been able to really put the hurt on the Karangri Broodmounts. We saw, you know, how quickly they were able to bring down the other two over here, as well as the Udish Abomination. That's something that heavily armored melee cavalry actually can do pretty well, because of the way that those cavalry models are spaced out. They don't take as much damage from the AoE as infantry units do, so it's much harder for the elephants to, you know, carve their way through there. And of course they get their bonuses. So if they were brought to bear over here, he could have had, you know, two basically fresh units of heavy elite multiple HP infantry, and he could be using those to kind of rebuff the Kuthalim and some of the Donatham and Blong and the 2 HP units from Doriath as well. We'll look at the difference here. So look at this. That cavalry pinning them in place, and then the Sentinels managing to get in there, and they are just blender lording their way through those Tyrian Lyston and just hacking them to little bits here, scattering them like leaves before the wind. And this is just small numbers of models from units, right? They are just doing fabulous there, just absolutely blendering these guys. And just imagine if they were working in tandem the entire time against the attackers. This would be a very, very different game. At the moment, it is quite close. There's about a 4% or so difference, and that's, pretty damn good. Nice shot there. I don't know where that came from. I think that was the Nargothrond units. And they actually just cooked their ally here, almost causing a mass rout, which could have been very ugly indeed. A nasty shot there in response by the Hungering Maw, knocking over a lot of these units here, and that could be enough to cause a rout. Over here, Cursed of Alquilande definitely have something to say about what's going on up here on the hill. These Archers of Amron just putting up a valiant stand here against some of these shield bearers, but this is really a wet noodle fight. Like, this is just going to go on forever. So hopefully the Cursed of Alquilande can get in there and really make a difference, especially against the Warriors of Regon. They are fear-causing and very, very highly damaging as well, and they are, of course, relentless. So they will just blender their way through here, which will hopefully free up a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be decisive. I think we're starting to see a little bit of maybe breaking here on the lines, and the Hungering Maw. Look at this. This is juicy. This is juicy. If I was Turner's Fox, this is exactly what I would be going for. Well, let's see what he does. Hungering Maw just kind of sitting there, just hanging out, having a great time, taking in the sights. Beautiful coastal view here. This is really what it's all about. It really just came out here for a wonderful vacation from the horrible, dreary peaks of Nandan Gorthab. Nope. Here it comes. It's either going to charge or it's going to get a disgusting shot all the way down that line. It looks like Tommy the Wise has something to say about it. Getting in there with the catapult crew. and knocking the Hungering Maw out of position and preserving his advantage here for just a little while longer. If Tommy could just keep this going, you know, maybe he can pull this off. But the Hungering Maw, now that the Catapult crew has been committed to the front here, I think we know exactly what it's going to do. And we're going to get front row seats to that, let me tell you. So, Hungering Maw just kind of hanging out there. Meanwhile, in the back, looks like the Footmen of Amherst are slowly but surely carving their way through some of the units that managed to break through the lines. And, oh, there it is! Just so nasty. And that might be enough here to maybe break the morale of some of the mid-tier units. Ooh, another shot coming in there. It's not killing a lot of people, but it is enough to break the spirits of some of the Archers of Amarant there, and that is going to swing things back in favor of Doriath. And now that this hole has been broken in the line here, still a very healthy unit of Donathan Mablung mixed in with the Kuthalim, and they are slowly but surely wrapping up the Feyenoord line, and they're just going to completely and fully encircle these units here. Donathan Mablung charging downhill into the rear of the Catapult crew, and that should be enough to break their spirits here. Defenders of Aglon going to try and even out the fight, but oh, those poor Catapult men. They're winded, they're attacked in the rear, they are not long for this world. Looks like there's not a lot that Tommy has left over here. Some Footmen of Amherst have just been fighting up here, but again, it was a wet noodle fight for a very long time, and they're just kind of exhausted. Now, Tommy needs to activate this unit, try and get them into the rear of the Donathan Mablung, try and do, you know, something. Maybe, you know, leave the archers in here, bring the Accursed of Aquilonde in at the same time as the Footmen of Amherst instead of sending them in piecemeal like this. Send them in together so they can try and encircle this mob here and maybe turn things around. It's still very much hanging in the balance. I've got 95 to 95, so things have really started to even out here. But yeah, those Footmen of Amherst on their own, not going to be amazing. Bringing in the fear-causing Aquilonde unit into the rear of these troops, that might be decisive, you know. But instead, they're just kind of fighting up here against the shield bearers. I think Tommy now kind of realizes that, but yeah. I think he's going to end up sending them over here to the Donathan Mablung. And as I mentioned earlier, the Accursed of Aquilonde have exceptionally high armor values, way higher than a lot of the already well-armored Feyenoord units. But they don't have a lot of melee defense, so toe-to-toe with the Donathan Mablung, they're going to fare very, very badly, and they're not really going to route anything, and the Kuthalim are going to rapidly shift, and they're going to basically double-team this unit, so there's going to be no nice rear charge there for them. Some of the Donathan Mablung will take losses there, but it's not going to be enough. And the Accursed of Aquilonde will take a huge hit there. The fear from the Hungering Maw and being attacked in the rear and just being exhausted, and that's basically going to be all she wrote for those two units. And they are going to break off and flee. 96 to 97 is still very close, but I think we can see which way the wind is blowing here for sure. And slowly but surely what remains of Feyenoord is being wrapped up. And I think it's a real tragedy here because they had a chance, right? Like, the defenders definitely could have won this. And I think it's really indicative of the way that Silmarillion has been going and how we've been progressing. Like, we've had trouble getting our sieges to be well balanced with the defenders being outnumbered. So a 3v4 like that, it would almost always win or always go in favor of the attackers just through sheer weight of numbers. But I think today we could really see the ways that the defenders could have made this an almost blowout victory in their favor. There's a lot of missed opportunities. Ooh, speaking of missed opportunities, all those fireballs just kind of ending up in the bay there instead of hitting anything of import. But yeah, we really saw a lot of the missed opportunities there. And the sort of lack of teamwork moving into the mid and end game of this battle that I think really cost it for the defenders. They had a shot to win this for sure, especially with the strong play early on, especially from Mevin. Valinor was doing very well in the center, but slowly but surely the breakthrough where Mithrim used to be, that's kind of where the dominoes all began to fall one after another. And I don't want to be too hard on Tommy because of course he's one of the newer players, but it does, I think, behoove it is useful for Tommy and for other players to kind of see where you know, the cracks in the gameplay are, and you can sort of make the adjustments that you need to moving in to future battles. So I think that Tommy, he played pretty well for being a newer player, but there's definitely some really critical mistakes here that really mostly centered around not supporting his teammates and not using the cavalry well. And that really just comes down, I think, to experience ultimately. So really nicely done here on the part of the attackers. They did everything that they were supposed to do, and they did it in the face of some fairly staunch resistance on the part of the defending armies. Really where it all came crumbling down was a lack of teamwork and coordination on the part of the defending armies. If they had done that, even with the attackers, you know, playing as well as they did and having strong army columns and supporting one another, it would have basically just been game over. It would have been almost one-sided in favor of the defenders. So we're going to go ahead and turn it up here just a little bit. There goes the Feyenoord general. Maedhros himself has fallen. And that is basically going to be it here for this battle. Really close, right down to what the last 3 or so % here. Not much of Nandan Gorthab left over. Almost nothing of Fingolfin. It's really coming down to a little bit from Nargothrond and a little bit from Doriath. So a really good battle there. Mevin did fabulous, got a ton of kills. Tommy, of course, got a lot of kills as well. But again, there were some things that could have been done better that would have resulted, I think, in a victory. Don did pretty well, although I think he needed to be a little bit more spot on with his reaction times there and his anticipating of the needs of both himself and his allies. Could have been a little bit quicker. Alexander didn't do too badly there against Mevin, but of course he ran into the teeth of a really well-positioned and strong composition that really countered a lot of the things that he had brought, and so he crumbled under that pressure quite understandably. Lord of Belegost really slugged it out with Valinor for a real long time there, ultimately managing to push through. Tundra's Fox, despite the very small numbers of his army, managed to do very well. Getting 1,100 kills when he only got 514 units is quite impressive, and Captain Gervais didn't do too badly as well. He definitely had the most, I think, of the remaining units moving in to that end game. So let's take a look here and see what Mithrim did. Those human guildsmen of Androth just doing fabulous. Look at that. 219 kills, 201, 105, 138. Really a lot of the kills from most of his army were centered among the Scions of Tuor and the Hewing Guildsmen of Androth. And of course, the bane of the incomers, they just had everything going their way in that fight. They had this beautiful turkey shoot with a lot of more lightly armored Edain units, and they just blew them to pieces. Wonderfully positioned. Bannerets of the Hidden Shore didn't do too badly. 123 kills in that unit is not bad at all. They can do a lot more damage, but he had very limited, avenues of attack. So I think 123 with that Lancer unit is actually quite impressive given the circumstances. Elders of the Twilight Hearth didn't do too badly. I'm not sure they necessarily paid for themselves. I probably would have gone a little bit of a different way. I might have brought one and then, brought more mid-tiers or another Bane of the Incomer if I could. Something like that. Maybe even another of the Human Guildsmen, and that might have been enough to kind of swing things very much in Mithrim's favor. But who knows? It's easy with the whole hindsight thing, being 2020. Hope you guys enjoyed this. It was a really cool battle. I think it was nice to see Mithrim on the field again. I'm going to be following this up with as much tournament coverage as I possibly can. I did record a lot of the games, and I realized that some of the replays appeared to be corrupted or desynced. So I'm going to go through them all again. I'm going to pick the ones that are on point and accurately reflect the results, and then hopefully I will have the finals to show you. The finals haven't been completed just yet, but soon, very soon. In any case, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Hope you guys enjoyed the siege, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye!